Right, Don Vander Boon's family has been in the meatpacking and processing business for over a half a century, starting with his father after he returned from World War II. And they've been running their business according to their Christian faith. That was until just a couple of years ago when the federal government decided to butcher the family's First Amendment freedoms. Joining us now to share his story is Don Vander Boon, along with Greg standing by here as once again representing one of these Christians who have had their faith attacked. Don, thanks so much for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Tell our listeners what happened to you. You, as a meat processing facility, have the inspectors from the USDA there on site, and you had an incident that took place a couple of years ago.
Yes, so I operate a small beef processing facility, and we have 2 full-time USDA employees that are in our business all day, every day.
That's required by law.
That's required by law, and so everything that we do has to be passed and inspected by them in order for me to sell it. And so a couple of years ago, around the time of the same-sex marriage decision, I had seen quite a few articles in the newspaper, and we have a break room with a couple of tables where people sit and eat, and it got to be practice. People could bring in magazines, newspapers to share with others. And so around the time of this decision, I noticed a lot of the newspaper articles were very supportive of same-sex marriage, and a lot of articles that were kind of encouraging it. So when I saw an article on the internet that was giving more of a biblical idea of what marriage is and what family is and what I believe is God's plan for the family, I printed it out and put it on my break room table and didn't think too much of it. But then within a few hours, I was told there were people there to see me in my office. And so my office is upstairs, so I went up to my office, and there is the inspector in charge, one of the inspectors, and he had called his boss. And they were both standing in my office looking upset, and I wondered what I had done. I had this feeling like I'd been caught doing something, I didn't know what. And then they shut my doors, so I'm sitting there with them both standing looking at me, and I'm wondering.
This is in your business?
In my business. And so then they take this article that I had on the table, they had removed it, and they lay it on the table in my office and say, "Are you going to leave this article on your break room table? Because if you are, we're going to withdraw our inspectors immediately. We're not willing to work in a place that has an article like this on the table."
Which means your business would be shut down.
Yes, I can't operate at all without them.
Now, just to help me provide some context here for our viewers. You have a small business, about 45 employees.
Yes.
And privately owned. You are a Christian company, as we talked, as mentioned earlier. Your family has been in the meat processing business for over 50 years, almost 65 years or so. You've always operated as a Christian business.
Yes, my father and my uncle were very open with their faith, and their business unfortunately failed in 1998, and then my brother and I had an opportunity to start this in 2003, and I did the same thing that my father did and my uncle and what we had always done, be very open. I would pray with my employees in the beginning, especially when times were tough. We would pray together, and I'd ask for God's help. I'd put religious materials on the table, and we were open about it with them when we hired people. So it was a business that we always tried to run according to biblical principles.
Well, in your website actually says that the company seeks to glorify and honor God in all that we do. So it's not like you're hiding your faith.
No.
Did your employees complain about any of this?
My employees have never had any problem with that.
They knew what kind of company they were working for, probably glad to work in a company like that.
Yes, I never had any. Employees are always very happy, usually appreciative of what we do, and hopefully it makes us a better company to work for.
Greg Baylor, I got to ask you this. I mean, when you first heard of this case, what did you think?
Just a remarkable thing. There couldn't be a more clear-cut violation of the free speech clause. Don and his company do have a right to express their views about a lot of issues, including the issue of marriage and sexuality. And for the government to come in and say, we're not going to allow your business to operate, we're going to jeopardize your company, we're going to jeopardize the jobs of your people just because we find offensive a particular viewpoint on marriage, really is remarkable. We've communicated with the USDA, asked them to fix this situation. They've largely ignored it, but just recently they did say that they're going to take up the complaint that Don and his company filed, and that's an encouragement.
But that's been filed for some time now.
It was 2015 when this incident happened, and the complaint that Don filed was in 2015. We didn't hear any, as of February this year, we hadn't heard a thing except acknowledgement of receipt of the letter, nothing substantive at all. And that in itself is a problem. But again, they have recently responded saying they're going to at least consider the complaint that he filed.
But that's under a new administration.
Indeed.
But this whole issue could be resolved with, as we were talking earlier, with an executive order, could it not?
Yeah, and one of the big problems is that administrations, governments need to respect religious liberty. That needs to be not at the back of their mind, it needs to be at the front of their mind. And I think an executive order, among other things, including the details, aside from the details, can tell everyone who works for the federal government, think first about religious freedom and the impact that you're imposing on it.
Don, I have to ask you, how has this affected you and your family in this business as this thing has kind of just been out there, hanging out there over your heads for so long?
Well, the hardest thing is I still have to work with the same people all day, every day. And so
The
I'll
inspectors?
Yes, and so I will still see them occasionally come through my break room and look through the materials on the table, look it over. And so when I get things in the mail or something I think I'd like to share, I sit there and have to think and wonder whether this would be the thing that will get me in trouble, whether it's going to be the thing they decide they don't want to work in my business and cause me trouble with it. So to this day, I'm still dealing with it.
This is incredible. His own business, his own building, own work table, his own break table, and if he puts information, it's as if you've got the government coming in, thumbing through his mail to see what he's reading and sharing with his employees and threatening to essentially shut down his business.
You know, I don't mean to exaggerate, but this sounds like something out of an Orwell novel or the
does.
Soviet Union, the government actually rifling through your mail, looking to see what's on your break table. That's not the America that I grew up in.
This is what's at stake across the spectrum in America today. I mean, we've looked at college campuses, we've looked at the military, this is a private business. I mean, I'm almost flabbergasted to try to comprehend how far they could go if they can take materials off of someone's break table, privately owned business, simply because they disagree with it.
Well, and so many people, unfortunately, especially in the government, have embraced the idea that there isn't a freedom to speak, but there's a freedom to be free from offense. And anything that Don or anybody else says that's offensive, they have a right to be protected from that. I don't think a government inspector, of course, should be harassed or anything like that when they go into a workplace. But the idea that they can't work there simply because he's expressed his viewpoint, a viewpoint that he shares with tens of millions of Americans, that seems too far.
But what they're
me.
doing is they're dictating their viewpoint on him in his privately owned business. Don, we're almost out of time here, but I want to ask you this from a standpoint of kind of stepping back for a moment from the issue per se, and about how this has affected you and your family spiritually as I'm sure you never expected to be in the center of this. How has this impacted you?
Yeah, I never expected to have to deal with this. I'd done a lot of reading about others that have dealt with it, so all of a sudden it was me, not somebody else. And so, yeah, it's really made me go back and think about what this country was founded on, and that our forefathers fought for this freedom to be able to express themselves and to be able to exercise their religion. And suddenly I'm in the battle too, and having to fight for the same thing they did.
Well, thank you for being willing to stand up, Don, and I know that you've found a great ally in the Alliance Defending Freedom and the great work that they do. But I go back to what I talked to Chaplain Motter about. Unless there are those that are willing to stand up and make themselves even a bigger target in some ways, but to stand up and defend that first freedom, that is, you made a point to describe that others have sacrificed to achieve for us. We will lose it if we won't stand up and defend it. So Don, thank you for being willing to do that.
God's grace.
Greg, thank you so much as well for being with us and all the work that ADF does on behalf of religious freedom in this country.